Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where the cost of President Trump's war against Iran is growing politically, militarily, and economically. This afternoon, President Trump addressing for the first time criticism and concerns over poor conditions and fading morale on board the USS Abraham Lincoln, which has been deployed since December, with 5,000 sailors and Marines on board.
Family members of U.S. service members are concerned about the conditions on board the USS Lincoln.
Well, no, that ship is moving. No, they're not. That ship is moving right now, or very shortly, and it's being replaced with another very similar ship.
Has the deployment's gone on too long?
No. Not nearly long enough.
It comes after Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth similarly disputed reports about problems aboard U.S. ships deployed in the war against Iran.
Completely misrepresented. Listen, we make sure that every ship, every crew, every captain has everything we can provide them at every single moment. And so to that crew and to all those crews, we're going to do everything we can for you. And we are so grateful for their dedication of that crew and others. They've held the line for the country, and they've done a fantastic job.
And yet, here's what one mother whose son is serving on the USS Lincoln told NBC News.
You definitely see a change in his overall mental health. And where he had been very positive, it started getting very dark. He describes the overall experience as a scene out of the American Horror Story, where he feels like everybody is dead, but they don't know it yet. And a lot of concern about when they're going to go home.
The Lincoln is now set to be replaced by the USS George Washington in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, the Iran war also continues to drain the military's arsenal. The Washington Post reporting the Pentagon lost 45 Reaper drones, or about a quarter of its fleet, over the course of the war. It adds to the growing list of weapons stockpile concerns facing the Pentagon. And of course, the economic cost of the war is being felt acutely by Americans here at home, as the average cost of gas remains above $4 a gallon and oil prices remain above $80 a barrel. Vice President J.D. Vance now saying ending Iran's nuclear program is no longer the #1 goal of this war. Here's what he said yesterday.
I know that oil is down today, and it's way down from the highs in the early days of the conflict. That's goal #1. Keep oil and gas cheap for Americans all over our country. And then obviously goal #2 is ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon.
It also comes as the political cost of the war for the president and Republicans continues to rise. New polling shows voters in states that will be critical in this year's midterms list inflation and high prices as their most important issue heading into the elections. Joining me now is our team of reporters, NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, NBC News Chief International Correspondent Keir Simmons, and NBC News National Security Reporter Gordon Lubold. Monica, I want to start with you. What do you make of the president's reaction to those concerns about morale on the USS Abraham Lincoln? He seemed to dismiss them outright.
Absolutely, Kristen. And I mean, it's hard not to look at those comments through the lens of that mother of a soldier that you just played in the introduction. What family members must feel when they see those comments for themselves, with the president himself trying to say that what they are saying on the record, on camera, multiple families of these sailors aboard the USS Lincoln is, in the president's view, simply either not to be believed or shouldn't be considered. I think they will find that incredibly dismissive. But then it wasn't just that question. In the follow-up by our own colleague, Julie Sirkin, who did a great job pressing the president there about the length of these deployments, the president said that he didn't believe they were long enough, implying that they could continue to be out at sea when we know that they are being sent an additional USS Washington carrier to swap out with them because of how long they have been on that deployment. So I think these comments are certainly going to be met with a lot of criticism from those who find that that is disrespectful potentially to the military and the service members who have been a part of this. But it's also something that the president will likely double down on. When his own aides were asked here about those comments just a short time ago, they said that, of course, the commander-in-chief, the president, respects U.S. service members. But I think those comments were pretty blatant and are certainly going to continue to raise questions about just the conditions of, again, what these service members are saying themselves are experiencing in real time.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Monica. And Julie did do a great job pressing the president. Look, what is the administration's thinking, Monica, when it comes to the economy and also, of course, the Strait of Hormuz, which are so linked together?
Absolutely. And the president just now has been speaking about this at his event in New York. And he made some comments that might also be a little bit eyebrow raising about the Strait of Hormuz and how he believes it could be considered in the future. Let's play that and talk about it on the other side.
Pretty soon I'll be declaring the Hormuz Strait a territory of the United States. Essentially, that's what it is. We have the blockade. No ships get through unless we want them to.
Now, the president has said in recent days, Kristen, that he believes that the Strait of Hormuz is fully controlled by the U.S. He did reference that naval blockade that, of course, we should point out means that many resources and assets and additional military service members will have to be involved in perhaps forever or as long as the U.S. keeps that blockade in place. But really, when the president says that, it's missing the context that the Strait of Hormuz was not operated by the United States, of course, before this conflict began. And there were no issues. It operated without incident as a critical waterway where commercial ships could travel through. And of course, that hasn't been the case since this conflict started. And that has been an economic choke point that this White House is acutely aware of. So it's really missing that overall context. But obviously, the president perhaps joking there, trying to convey that he believes the U.S. has more control than it really does there.
Yeah, important context there, Monica. We're also learning Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent may be hinting at some more sanctions against Iran. What are you hearing about that?
Yeah, and I mean, this is something that we kind of hear repeatedly. We have obviously seen sanctions imposed on Iran throughout the course of this 6-month war, but it's also something that they sort of pivot back to when they are unsure about how to talk about the timeline and what to expect about what could happen next. The economic pressure, the Operation Economic Fury is sort of a familiar refrain here from the White House and the Treasury Secretary, but so far it doesn't seem that it has had the kind of pressure that they hope it would. Iran has proven to be quite defiantly patient in this case, but this is likely something you will continue to hear from the White House as another tool they say they can continue to use, though, again, to some mixed results. Kristen.
Yeah. Absolutely. Monica Alba starting us off at the White House. Monica, thank you so much for your great reporting. As always, Keir Simmons, let me turn to you. I want to get your reaction to that statement from the president just moments ago that the U.S. could potentially declare the Strait of Hormuz U.S. territory. How do you think that's going to be received in the region?
Well, it depends which country, but certainly, broadly speaking, the region is very worried. If you are talking about the Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, where I am, because President Trump says that the only ships that get through are the ships that the U.S. wants, but the U.S. and its allies and partners here would like many more vessels to get through, and they're not able to because of Iran. I mean, I think that conversation you were having about Secretary Bessent, this has moved from a battle of strength to a battle of wills, to a battle of endurance, a war of endurance. And I think that's what those sanctions are about, really, just baking in, if you like, that I think the Trump administration has shifted to recognize that this is going to take a long time if they're going to get anywhere close to the kinds of demands that Washington has been making. But that's not to say that there aren't huge risks here, simply because it's long and maybe gets a little slower, if you like. For example, where I am, Kristen, I am over on the Jeddah side of Saudi Arabia, where the Red Sea is, and there is now increasing friction with the Houthis in Yemen, who are trying to stop ships from getting through another narrow strait there, the Bab al-Mandeb. And just today there was a report of Houthis firing on ships there inside Yemen. How is Saudi Arabia going to deal with it? Is this going to escalate here? And everyone watching will know that the Houthis are supported by Iran, quite profoundly supported by Iran at this point. I'll just say one other thing. I think the Iranians ultimately are preparing for a long fight. They've shifted their leadership. Mashtaba Hamani, the Supreme Leader, has shifted their leadership last weekend. And I think one of the reasons for that is they simply do not trust the United States and the Trump administration that they're actually going to go through with any deal that's done.
Well, to follow up on that point, Keir, I mean, it has been 60 days since the president and Iran signed that memorandum of understanding. Are you hearing anything about the status of talks? Are they making any progress, Keir? Because there doesn't seem to be an off-ramp or an end in sight anywhere at this point.
Yeah, look, I mean, they are close, but quite often with negotiations, the last part is the hardest part. And those are those negotiations between Oman and Iran, which is really just about figuring out the logistics of how you might open the straits, never mind the question of actually doing it, which, of course, last weekend, when we just thought things might reach a breakthrough of some nature, the Iranians upped the ante and started making more demands. And I think that's a sign, too, that the Iranians, I mean, Kristen, you watch the US political calendar as closely as anyone. The Iranians are probably second place. They watch American domestic politics like hawks, and they think they know what to do in order to press the right buttons. And so I suspect they're looking at the midterms, they are looking at the Trump administration, and they are saying, we can just keep going, put more and more pressure on President Trump. And frankly, they may well be thinking, and they have signaled this, that they might even need to wait out President Trump. That's the kind of, I guess you could say, determination. One of the points it's important to make, though, Iran has inflation. President Trump is right about this. Inflation of 90%. I mean, the economy is in pieces over there, not far from here, actually. And you never know what implications that kind of joblessness and struggling to find food and all those issues for the Iranian people might have, and how that might shift things inside Iran.
Well, Keir, it's such an important context, and I think the way you set it up, that this is becoming a battle of wills. It's part of why these talks are moving so slowly. Keir Simmons, reporting from Saudi Arabia. Thank you so much, Keir. We really appreciate it, as always. Gordon, let me turn to you and that extraordinary reaction that we got from President Trump, his answers to our own Julie Sirkin, pressing him on his response to military families who are expressing concerns about the fatigue, the exhaustion of their loved ones serving on the USS Lincoln. The president really downplaying it. We know lawmakers on Capitol Hill are calling for oversight. How's the Pentagon responding overall?
So, this has been a White House and a Pentagon that has struggled to acknowledge the impact of this war. Again, it was supposed to be 5 or 6 weeks, and now we're in the 6th month, actually in the 7th month. And so, when it comes to munitions, when it comes to the use of munitions, the destruction of bases in the region of U.S. bases and other factors that just don't, acknowledging that as a sign of weakness in their mind. And so this is why you're seeing Secretary Hegseth say what he's saying. The stunning kind of comments from the president today to Julie was surprising, because that doesn't have a good look, right, over time. One of the problems here with this Navy issue in particular is it's not just the fresh fruit and vegetables they can't get on the ship and the morale issues, and not to downplay those, but it's the cumulative effect. And, recruiting and retention is like a key thing that the Navy is looking at. So when you see the commander-in-chief saying, a Navy mother's comments and several parents, remarks about this, it's not a good look, and it's not going to help them in the long term.
Well, the mother's comments are so powerful. There's no doubt about that, and speak to and flesh out the reporting that you've been all over all week. And you have some more reporting about Iran potentially changing its strategic priorities. What are you learning there, Gordon?
Yeah, look, my colleagues Courtney and Moshe reported earlier that there was a U.S. assessment on Iran's view of this thing, and they have certainly shifted to the Strait. Don't forget that all these years that Iran has been fighting the U.S. kind of in a Cold War in Iraq in particular, and in the region, it's their unconventional capabilities that have always been the issue. So the president and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth like to focus on the conventional capabilities they've wiped out over the last 6 months, but it's these unconventional ones, particularly as it relates to the Strait of Hormuz and the ability to create a perception that it's no longer safe. This is the thing that they have trouble countering. And, I think the president was also briefed on what it would take to kind of take the strait by force. And that's not a great proposition. We hear about the president says, or people say that there are few options for the president. This is one of the reasons why, because that would mean enormous number of troops and enormous number of peril for those troops if he were to do that.
Yeah, and you think about how that might backfire on the administration, on the president, how unpopular that would be to send in troops. Gordon, thank you so very much. Really appreciate your being here. Coming up, Luigi Mangione pleads guilty to federal charges related to the killing of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, telling the court in his own words how he tracked the CEO and shot him on a New York City street. We are live outside the courthouse. Plus, ballroom battle. President Trump asked the Supreme Court to allow his sprawling White House construction project to move forward. Those developments and all the political fallout ahead. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. It was a huge day of developments in New York where Luigi Mangione pleaded guilty to 2 federal stalking charges tied to the 2024 killing of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. With Thompson's family in the courtroom, Mangione admitted he shot and killed Thompson in December of 2024 outside a Midtown Manhattan hotel. He also revealed for the first time he posed as a potential investor and emailed United Healthcare to confirm the location of the investors' conference Thompson was attending. Mangione telling the judge he was motivated by his experience with the healthcare system as he dealt with a back injury. Federal prosecutors telling reporters afterward Mangione's grievances do not justify his actions.
The defendant committed this murder in an attempt to draw public attention to his dislike of certain businesses. But we live in a civilized society governed by the rule of law. We debate, we disagree, we protest. We do not commit murder. No grievance, political belief, or ideological cause can ever justify murder.
Today's guilty plea comes just as a couple of weeks before Mangione was set to stand trial on state murder charges. His lawyers are now arguing those charges should be dismissed because today's plea covers the same crime and a conviction would amount to double jeopardy. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock joins me now from New York, along with NBC News legal analyst Misty Maris. Thanks to both of you for being here on such a significant day in this case. Sam, let me start with you. Set the scene for what unfolded today in that federal courtroom.
Kristen, it certainly felt like a crescendo. I mean, this is a story that has captivated the country for the last 18 plus months. Just talking to some of my colleagues here, I had a few takeaways that I felt like were just jaw-dropping moments today, and many of them felt the same way. Certainly, as you just laid out in your introduction, the fact that Luigi Mangione fessed up to murdering Brian Thompson and doing so without really changing the emotional tenor of how he was describing things. He came into the courtroom, he had prepared notes, he was dressed in prison attire. It was pretty clear he wasn't wearing a suit, and this wasn't about having some sort of theoretical back and forth. He was there for a confession and then truly for the federal stalking charges. That was exceptional, but beyond that, this idea that he had called United Healthcare and posed as an investor of a large healthcare insurance company that had $50 billion in assets under management, according to Mangione, who was under oath today. And they then sent him the location of where this investor conference was taking place, in his words. That was stunning. And then also Karen Agnifilo, his attorney, her response after the fact. She did say on the courthouse steps here that, he takes accountability for the murder of Brian Thompson. But then she went on about a 30 to 45 second explainer that he was effectively the victim of a situation, the victim of a system in which he wasn't able to get adequate health care for his back pain. After you just watched the mother and the wife of Brian Thompson crying and consoling one another inside of the courtroom, there was almost no, I shudder to use this term, but humanity reflected in their response. I mean, they basically said, okay, he takes responsibility for this, but, and never really laid out what this family was going through and has been enduring over the course of the last 18 months. Truly, like the totality of it together was shocking, but it also feels like, Kristen, now he's admitted to committing murder. That's what Luigi Mangione just did inside of this courtroom. There is a second-degree murder case that is supposed to start on September 8th. Agnifilo and his legal defense team has now tried to file to shut that down under a double jeopardy motion, but he has already admitted to the fact that he killed this man. How we move forward from here after all of this conversation around his crusade about health care and the manhunt and the Midtown murder and how it all converges over today's confession is going to be fascinating to see how it all unfolds.
It certainly will be. I know you'll be covering every twist and turn. Let me just follow up with you, Sam, on a point that you make, which is about Brian Thompson's family. You talk about how emotional they were. Just give us a deeper sense of what it was like to see them react in that courtroom.
You watched them all walk in, and I'm going to say it was about 9 or 10 people. It seemed like it was certainly his wife, his mom, brothers and sisters, perhaps cousins. I mean, there was 9 or 10 of them in the second row of the gallery. The proceedings began, and as Luigi Mangione walked in for a second, I remember to look up just to see whatever I could gather from their part of the gallery, and his wife was loudly crying, enough where I noticed it, and she was taking a tissue, and I couldn't see her face, but I could see the back of her body. She was wiping the tears away from her cheek, and she was being consoled at the same time by Brian Thompson's mother, who put her arm around his wife's shoulder as they were sort of absorbing this. It probably was the first time they had seen Luigi Mangione since this all started. By the same token, Kristen, I would direct you to the statement that the family offered. They said something to the effect of, this is a step for justice, right? We are grateful that there's justice and accountability here. But they also said, while nothing will ease the pain of losing him, we are grateful that the federal justice system has held the person responsible for this heinous act accountable. Now, we look to the court to ensure that sentencing reflects the severity of this crime. Here's the bottom line, right? The federal stalking charge alone could carry potentially life in prison as a maximum sentence. It is entirely within the discretion of the judge whether that comes to fruition. We will not find out until sentencing hearing on December 18th, Kristen.
All right. Well, we will watch and wait to see what happens then. Sam Brock, thank you so much. We really appreciate your great reporting from inside the courtroom. Misty, let me turn to you now. Help us understand this guilty plea today. Why did he do it? What happens next?
So, Kristen, I think it was a calculated risk taken by the defense, because if they had gone to trial on these federal charges, there's the possibility he gets convicted, he gets sentenced to life without parole, life in federal prison. There is no parole in that system. So in order to have a chance at something less than life, he's taking this federal guilty plea, which gives him the benefit of arguing to the judge, presenting the mitigating factor that he pled guilty. And not only did he plead guilty, he pled guilty well in advance of trial. So that will give him a benefit. In addition to that, he can now raise this argument of double jeopardy and try and get rid of, kick out that state case, which happened, I think, minutes after the guilty plea was entered. So this was really strategic from a timing perspective, because the New York state law on double jeopardy, way more expensive than federal. So this would only work one way, Kristen, if the federal case was resolved with a conviction before the state court case went. So there's a lot of gamesmanship here and strategy in entering this plea today.
Help us understand the double jeopardy piece of this a little bit more. Are they accurate that it could amount to double jeopardy?
So there's a strong argument under New York law. The same transaction or occurrence is the standard. So if somebody is being charged with a crime that they've already been convicted of, or in this case pled guilty to, and it arises out of the same transaction or occurrence, it can be double jeopardy under the New York law. Now, there are exceptions to that. One of those exceptions is that there is a different type of harm that is at issue between the two different charges. So that is most certainly what prosecutors are going to argue. Interestingly enough, the lead case on this was Paul Manafort. He was able to successfully get New York state charges dismissed after a federal conviction. So that is an appellate case, the lead case. Now, I will say that was a little more 1-for-1 on the types of charges. So this could actually be a case of first impression when it comes to the limits of that double jeopardy rule.
I want to play for you something that Sam Brock actually referenced, which is what Mangione's attorney told reporters after today's hearing. Let me play a little bit for you and get your reaction on the other side.
Despite this being a single isolated event, Mr. Mangione has been unfairly treated since the outset in every way and has successfully fought off terrorism charges, and the death penalty, while also fighting at the same time 2 simultaneous prosecutions in 2 jurisdictions who are trying to punish him twice for the exact conduct.
Unfairly treated? What do you make of that?
This has been the defense theme throughout the entirety of these prosecutions. They've raised this double jeopardy issue. They have said that Luigi Mangione was overcharged. They were able to get death penalty eligible charges thrown out of the federal, terrorism charges thrown out of the state. And now they continue with the double jeopardy argument, trying to get the entirety of the state court case thrown out. So this is not a new narrative from the defense.
Misty Maris, thank you very much for your legal insights. We really appreciate it. Coming up next, Democrats are now targeting more Republican House seats as they fight to retake control of Congress. I'll go one-on-one with a Republican congressman whose district is in Democrats' sights. Stay with us on Meet the Press now. Welcome back. With less than 3 months until the midterms, House Democrats are adding more Republican seats to their target list as they look to take back control of the House of Representatives. The DCCC, the organization charged with getting House Democrats elected, is now eyeing 58 Republican districts they think they could put in play. A party needs 218 seats to control the House. Right now, Democrats have 212 seats with several vacancies. And joining me now is Republican Congressman Mike Flood, who represents one of the Nebraska districts Democrats have their sights on. Congressman, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for having me on.
Well, let's start right there. Democrats do see your district as a potential pickup. How confident are you can hold on to your seat? How do you plan to do it?
Well, these are D.C. Beltway Democrats that know how Nebraska works. I won my race in 22 by 16 points, my last race by 20 points. I've got lots of money in the bank. My opponent doesn't have hardly anything. And I have delivered on housing affordability. I wrote the bill. I back money to the state of Nebraska, $89 million. That's in the top 2% of all 435 of us. I run the Main Street Caucus. I'm one of the only members of Congress on both sides that are holding town halls. And so I imagine you're sitting in the Beltway and you see somebody yelling at me on CNN. You think, oh, my gosh. The reality is that's 10 to 15 people out of 300 or 400 that have an opinion, and they just want to get loud and obnoxious TV, where I am meeting people where they're at. I'm in the community. I am delivering for the American people, and most notably for Nebraska. So I feel good about this cycle.
Congressman Flood, you take me to my next question. I do want to ask you, you had a spirited town hall late last month, and we should know, look, not all of your colleagues are choosing to do town halls right now. What's the top concern you are hearing from your constituents?
Well, home affordability, making ends meet, having a chance at the American dream. And that's why, as the chairman of the Housing Committee, we passed the most comprehensive housing legislation in 36 years. And I was excited to be able to tell my constituents that we wrote that bill. It went through Nebraska. I know that when you watch town halls, there are people there. Their goal is to get on TV. Their goal is to have a viral moment. Not all of them, just a handful of them. But I get a lot out of these town halls. I have an opportunity to defend my votes, but more importantly, to answer questions. And I think more often than not, I have independent voters that come up to me and they say, hey, Mike, I may not agree with you on every single position you have, but I do appreciate that you're out in the town square and you are dealing with the issues. And that's as much as some of them can ask, they say, and they're willing to vote for me.
Let me ask you, because in an interview with Punchbowl last week, the president was questioned about whether voters who turned out for him in 2024 would turn out in the midterms. I want to play a little bit of that conversation, get your reaction.
The question is, will they vote? Because a lot of them are very angry at Republicans, to be honest with you.
Why is that?
I don't know. I mean, they're angry at Republicans, but they're not angry at me.
Why?
They're not angry at me, but they are angry at Republicans.
They are angry at Republicans, but not him. What do you make of that from the president?
My guess is he's referencing the SAVE Act to secure our elections and voter ID, something that I voted for 3 times in the House. And quite frankly, we have that in Nebraska already. It's something that we put in state law. So you have to show your ID when you go to the polls. Listen, I know that when the president's in power, the other party struggles. That's something that we've seen for 100 years. So we shouldn't be dismissive of that. That's why we have to be out. We have to be talking about what we've accomplished. Hey, we passed the largest tax cut in our nation's history. No taxes on tips, Social Security, overtime. You can pass the family farm on to the next generation without abusive death taxes. The child tax credit has been extended. There are so many good things that we have done in Congress in the last 2 years. It's on us as Republicans to get out there and share that message. We are the party that's unified. The Democrats are the ones who are having these proxy battles in every primary in the nation, where the choices are, do you want to defund the police, shut down prisons, eliminate the Thanksgiving holiday, have government grocery stores? Listen, that's splintering their party while we are united on making things more affordable and keeping Americans safe.
Do you worry, though, that that kind of language from the president could backfire, could ultimately hurt all of you, particularly given this climate where he's facing some of his lowest approval ratings since he took office?
Listen, the president is focused and has been on the SAVE Act from the start. I think it reflects his frustration with where that process is at, most notably in the Senate. It's the same reason he didn't sign the housing bill. He wants to keep a focus on election integrity and passing the SAVE Act. That's his strategy. My strategy is to be out in the middle of the town square, deliver for the people of Nebraska, make sure the University of Nebraska has the money it needs for ag research, make sure our farmers have crop insurance and markets for our corn and our beans, and getting year-round E15. That's what I have to deliver on. That's what I'm going to be judged on. And I'm confident going into November, we will be successful.
Let's turn to the war with Iran. President Trump said it would be completed in a matter of weeks. We're now heading to the 6th month. The president telling Axios earlier this week the U.S. is low-keying it when it comes to the war and semi-negotiating. Do you think that this could ultimately be a drag on your chances, on Republicans in tough districts, chances for re-election?
Well, I'll be honest. I go to Hy-Vee, which is our local grocery store, and prices are too high. I don't want to ever dismiss that. That is important, and some of that is tied back to our efforts in the Middle East. Iran is a nation that has vowed death to America for the better part of 50 years. They wake up and they threaten us with dirty bombs and nuclear bombs, and they are funding terrorism against us and our allies. The president is dealing with the cards that he's been dealt in a very dangerous region. My barber, 85 years old, been cutting my hair since I was a newborn. He said to me, I said to him, what do you think about Iran? He said, now's not the time to cut and run. Let's finish the job so we don't have to deal with these people for another 50 years. And I think that's where a lot of Americans are at.
Well, most Americans disapprove of the war, and we're learning that families of sailors aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln now sounding the alarm on low morale, deteriorating conditions on the USS Lincoln in particular. President Trump was asked about whether that deployment has gone on too long, and he told my colleague Julie Sirkin, quote, not long enough. What do you make of the president's response? Do you think he's taking this issue seriously enough?
Well, first of all, my prayers go out to the men and women of the armed forces every day, especially sailors on that aircraft carrier and any aircraft carrier, any vessel, any deployment. We have to put their mental health as a priority concern. I am having a hard time understanding why the Democrats won't work with us to replace our munitions so that we can keep our national security strong while they're making some statement that is really hurting our troops more than anything. The president believes in the armed forces. I was at Dover Air Force Base when those 7 bodies came overseas back to Delaware. I saw him react to those coffins. He feels that. He knows that. He's in their corner. And I know he appreciates everything that they're doing. They've got a terribly hard job. We had trouble getting the Democrats to work with us to fund the government. The Coast Guard wasn't getting aid, and yet every single Republican was voting to make the paychecks work, and no Democrats were.
But should he be downplaying the concerns
we have to
of
be
these
honest about
family
what's
members?
going on here.
But Congressman, should he be downplaying the concerns of these family members? He was basically said he doesn't think there's an issue aboard the USS Lincoln, and again, he said they haven't been deployed for long enough. Is that taking those issues seriously?
Well, first of all,
enough?
he's the president of the United States, and he has a lot more information about what's happening on that ship than I do. I know the president supports our troops. He believes in our troops. He's been the one working with Secretary Hegseth to improve our military and return that war-fighting spirit to the Department of War. So if this question is, does Donald Trump support the men and women of the United States Armed Forces? Unequivocally, yes. When you're the commander-in-chief, you've got a really hard job, just like those men and women and the sailors on that aircraft carrier. If there are issues, let's get them dealt with. Let's make sure those sailors know that we're in their corner. And by the way, let's replenish our munitions and stop playing political games with funding for the U.S. Armed Forces.
All right, Congressman Mike Flood, we're going to watch your race very closely. Thank you so very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Coming up after the break, battlegrounds and battle lines. New polling shows Democrats with an advantage in some of November's most consequential Senate races. We'll show you what those are. The panel is next. Keep it right here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Some potential good news for Democrats in key Senate battlegrounds. New polling from Fox News finds Democratic candidates ahead in 6 of the 7 states surveyed. In Georgia, incumbent Jon Ossoff has a double-digit lead over challenger Mike Collins. In North Carolina, Roy Cooper is up 9 points over Michael Whatley. And in Ohio, Sherrod Brown is beating incumbent John Husted by 8 points. Democrats also hold an edge, albeit within the margin of error, in 3 more Republican-held states. Josh Turek is ahead of Ashley Hinson in Iowa. James Tallarico leads Ken Paxton in Texas. And Troy Jackson is narrowly ahead of incumbent Susan Collins in Maine. The only state the Democrats are trailing in is Michigan, where Mike Rogers has a 4-point advantage over Abdul Al-Sayed. Joining me now is our panel, Kadia Goba, politics reporter at Notice, Josh Orton, Democratic strategist and president of Demand Justice, and Matt Gorman, Republican strategist and an NBC News contributor. Thanks to all of you for being here on this Friday. Kadia, what do you make of these polls coming off of another very busy primary week?
You know, if you would have asked me about these polls 8 months ago, I think I would have had a very different answer. But yeah, to your point, many Democrats, for some reason, it has expanded the map. They have expanded the map. And I think you'll hear like Republicans, especially senators, privately saying that they think they're toast for next year. But, you know, and when I ask them why, and I talk about this, they talk about like the president having very different priorities and that being clear and actually a really good talking point for Democrats. Also, it doesn't help that the Senate is in such a chaotic point right now, and they can't get legislation done. That has been, people are kind of over Washington, so it doesn't help that they can't pass bills.
So, Matt, pick up on that point. Kadia specifically talks about the concern that Republicans are expressing privately. And this type of poll, I would imagine, would only bolster those concerns. What are you hearing?
No, I mean, look, the snapshot of those polls, nothing struck me as terribly surprising, to be completely honest with you. Only maybe the surprising part was Susan Collins' margin was smaller than I expected, actually. But look, I think people, if you talk to Republicans, Georgia and North Carolina feel like reaches right about now. I think, you know, where people come down is obviously Maine, Texas. I feel pretty good we'll get to where we need to go in Iowa, certainly. And obviously Michigan is the outlier, certainly coming after the Al-Sayed primary win a couple weeks ago. So look, those feel right. But again, it's a matter of where does this happen and does this look the same after a lot of spending of the next 2 months?
Josh, what do you make of these numbers, and do Democrats risk being overly confident, particularly when they really need to hold on to Michigan if they're going to win back the Senate?
Yeah, what I like about these numbers is it shows that Democrats have multiple paths to taking back the Senate majority in November. Look, I think we see candidates like Tallarico and Sherrod Brown and Abdul al-Sayed in Michigan making the case to voters about taking on corporate power, whether we talk about data centers that are polluting water, whether we talk about, pharmaceutical companies ripping off consumers. So 10 out of 10 days, I'd much rather be Chuck Schumer than John Thune right now.
Yeah, Khadija, let's talk about what's happening inside the Democratic Party, because on Tuesday, Wednesday, we woke up to mixed results. Progressives did well in some races, moderates did well in other races. A little bit of a split decision, if you will, this week. And now the battle is really about unifying. And that's the question. I mean, what are Democrats saying to you about how confident they are that they can actually do that, particularly in a purple state like Michigan, where that's going to be the challenge for al-Sayed, not just to unify, but then to try to court some of those independent voters who he's going to need in order to win?
It's they came from, like you said, a very fractured primary season where a lot of their incumbents unexpectedly lost. But many of them have pointed out, especially with this recent polling, that, while Republicans have been very good messaging against communists, al-Sayed is very close to the Republican candidate and Mike Rogers, and that to them, or to Republicans especially, is a bit shocking that the polling shows that they're so close at this point.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, do you see this? I mean, look, Mike Rogers is ahead. What do you think an al-Sayed needs to do in a state like Michigan, a purple state where Republicans are going to put a lot of resources? It's going to be all hands on deck to try to win that race. And you have Mike Rogers, his first ad out of the gate was, if you woke up on Wednesday and felt uncomfortable, join me.
Yeah, look, I think al-Sayed ran a brilliant primary campaign. He was a huge underdog. And what he's going to do now is court every vote in Michigan and reach out to every constituency to reach them. And I think he's been doing a very good job showing that he's a fighter. Look, I think in Mike Rogers, the last time Trump was there a couple weeks ago and Mike Rogers was up on stage, it looked the whole time like he wanted to give Trump a hug, right? He's right now tied to the hip at the most unpopular president in modern history. And I think al-Sayed is going to make that case, and I think he's going to win in November.
How does that play in Michigan, Matt, particularly when you have the war with Iran dragging on here throughout the hour? We've been covering these concerns by family members of U.S. service members that they're dealing with substandard, quite frankly, inhumane living conditions in some cases.
Well, a couple things. I think with the Michigan Senate race, I mean, for Ion, since Spence Abraham won it in '94, he was the last Republican senator in Michigan. It's always been fool's gold. It's been like Wile E. Coyote with the Roadrunner. We always thought like a month out we could maybe get there. John James numerous times, and we never really could get there. I think certainly I haven't seen a poll with a Republican candidate winning Michigan this far out in quite a while, right? And I think too, we're going to try and make al-Sayed not only like your neighborhood communist, right, holding the DSA, but I think some of the opposition research of recent has been almost like a meddlesome HOA president talking about fireworks and how he doesn't like them, or football, and you want to make him kind of invasive in your everyday life. So expect that. Rogers also a unique candidate because he's also a vestige of the Bush GOP. Yeah. He's not necessarily a MAGA Republican who's coming through then. So it's a unique contours of the race where we haven't seen in other places either.
Josh, I have to ask you about Maine. We learned today that Graham Plattner, who of course dropped out of the race amid these sexual assault allegations, which he denies, is going to be appearing at a Labor Day event. If you are Troy Jackson, who is the new nominee for the Democrats, how are you responding? And could this hurt him, even though he's not going to appear with Graham Plattner?
Yeah, I kind of think that the only people that want to talk about Graham Plattner right now are people in D.C. or who have a show on television. I think that if I'm Troy Jackson, I point out the fact that the last person who I would expect to show up at a Labor Day picnic would be Susan Collins, right? Because she's done the bidding of corporations. I'm really comfortable with that contrast between the two of them. I think Troy Jackson's an excellent candidate. I think he's going to win.
How concerned is a Susan Collins? How concerned are Republicans when they look at Troy Jackson's very narrow lead right now?
Well, again, when you were running against an accused, sexual or domestic violence, person in Graham Plattner, it's the only way to go but up if you're a Democrat. So, they feel like it's not going to be as easy as if they're running against Graham Plattner. But again, I'm not surprised because when you see people who get off the stage like this or forced off the stage as Plattner was, they get a high on their own supply a little bit and they try to come back. I think it's what you're seeing with Plattner a little bit. So anytime Plattner's in the headlines, not a great day for Troy Jackson. But look, Troy Jackson is a fundamentally harder race for Collins, but she was counted out. We talked about this how many times in 2020. 20, down 8 points the last poll to Sarah Gideon, and she won resoundingly. So nobody's counting out Susan Collins.
All right, guys, great conversation on a very busy week. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Coming up after the break, relief and recovery efforts underway in Colombia. I'll talk to an aid worker on the ground responding to this week's devastating earthquake. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The death toll from this week's powerful earthquake in Colombia continues to climb. Officials now say at least 287 people were killed and nearly 4,000 others were injured in the magnitude 7.4 quake. The window to find survivors is closing, but crews are still searching around the clock for people buried beneath the rubble. The disaster devastated western Colombia, damaging or destroying tens of thousands of homes and businesses and impacting the lives of more than 100,000 people, many of whom lost everything. Juan Camilo Jimenez is the response director for the World Central Kitchen, one of the organizations helping with relief efforts in Colombia. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Let's dive right into this. You have said that the needs on the ground have been changing quickly after this earthquake. What are the most pressing needs right now?
Right now, we're in that window, as you were saying, we're still hope with search and rescue labors are just happening a few meters from where I am. So we're seeing how those efforts are going, but at the same time, how meals are needed and hot meals and water in this moment. So we're providing hot meals to make sure that people doing search and rescue labors, people that are going back to their homes, or people that are moving to other places have access to meals in these days. The need is very spread out. We're talking about 4 departments and many cities, 4 departments, where like hot meals are the same as urgent as other places.
Well, the work that you're doing is so needed, so important there. What exactly has World Central Kitchen been able to accomplish so far in Colombia?
So far, what we have accomplished in Colombia is working and creating a network of restaurants and cooks in Colombia that are the experts in cooking and providing meals to their people. So we have so far more than 35 restaurants around these cities providing 12,000 meals every day, and we look to increase this by day. This is just possible because we're partnering with local restaurants and communities that understand better how to support that. They join this effort and they know that they are not by themselves, that they are not alone. And together we're bringing hope to these communities in Pereira, in cities like Manizales, Armenia, Quibdó, Buenaventura. And if I'm behind with local cooks in Colombia is full of passion and resilience. That is what we're seeing in every street. Also, we're seeing a lot of hope. Hope is there still, but as we know that meals and food can be hope. And we're making sure that we're cooking those meals that remember people what life was before the earthquake. That traditional soup, that traditional stew that they were used to eat, now is getting back with them with our program, and we make sure that will comfort them.
You're talking about the hope there. Give us a sense of what you are experiencing on the ground, how the people there are holding up.
We're experiencing a very resilient community. The Colombians are showing great resilience and at the same time, it's showing hope. We see how people are coming together to rebuild, to remove debris, to look for those people still that need by trap. We see how the community come along when designed to make silence in a place is done, to make sure that they can hear their sign of life. We have been really moving, being in places where we're providing meals to first responders and volunteers, and this sign come to make silence and look for that possibility of life. So I'm seeing that hope and that resilience and solidarity. People that have not experienced doing this, just showing up to say, how can I do? How can I take a load of debris? How can I start to cook? How can I start to provide waters? So it's that community.
What has been the biggest challenge in the 4 days since the earthquake? What's your message to watching right now? Oh, and unfortunately, we just lost our connection, but we do want to thank Juan Camilo Jimenez and all of those there on the ground helping with search and rescue efforts, as well as World Central Kitchen. I do want to take a turn now to some election results from across the pond. In a UK election that drew international attention largely for its absurdity, Nigel Farage, a Trump ally and leader of the right-wing Reform UK party, won the special election that he triggered by resigning from office under investigation for financial impropriety. All of Britain's major political parties boycotted the election, calling it a political stunt by Farage. So while Farage has no mainstream opposition, the race did attract an array of fringe candidates, including a comedian who dresses in a trash can and goes by the name Count Binface. You see him there. Count Binface finished in second place with 27% of the vote compared to Farage's 63%. According to the BBC, the parliamentary investigation into Farage's finances resumed hours after he was declared the winner. Farage said he wanted to have the election prove he still has a mandate from his voters, despite ethics concerns. We're back Monday with more Meet the Press Now. And if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press on your local NBC News station. I'll have exclusive interviews with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Congressman Ro Khanna of California, plus Attorney General Todd Blanche, who was just sworn in. Do not miss it. There's much more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.